Hello and welcome to another interview episode of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. I'm Jon Cripwell, and today our focus is on a topic that will be front and centre of the new national curriculum in 2027-2028, but arguably should be a part of every teacher's toolkit today: Oracy. In this episode, we're taking a maths lesson apart, from the warm-up to the exit ticket, and exploring exactly how Oracy can strengthen every stage. We'll look at how talk builds fluency, how retrieval is supercharged when pupils articulate what they know, and how teacher modelling becomes clearer when thinking aloud. I'm really excited because my guest today is an educator that has spent more than 13 years teaching across the full breadth of primary, from nursery to year 6, and has seen firsthand how Oracy transforms pupils' confidence, progress, and sense of self. He now works as teaching and learning lead across the Maritime Academy Trust, supporting teachers and leaders in 13 schools to embed high-quality practice. I'm delighted to welcome Michael Gardner to the show. Welcome, Mike.
Hello, thank you for inviting me on, John.
No, absolute pleasure. It's great to have you here. You work, don't you, with in one of your schools with Omar Jennings, who was on one of the episodes fairly early on, where we talked about what teaching looks like in his school at the Nightingale School down in London. So it's great to catch up again. I think you mentioned that you've been working with Omar this morning.
I have, yeah. I was there this morning working with some of his mathematicians, actually, going through some different work using some technology. And and the children I taught way back when they were in year 2, but are now in year 6. So it's lovely to go back there. I get to go there every week or so to help out and keep in touch with the sort of place where I really flourished as a teacher.
Yeah, I remember Omar mentioned working with you and the impact that you'd had working together at the school. So it's great to have you on. And obviously, Oracy is definitely your thing. If we were going to speak to anybody about Oracy, I think you are the go-to person. So I'm definitely excited to have this chat with you. Before we get into that, Mike, we always ask, just for a little bit of context and background, what was maths your favourite subject at school, or was it something that that perhaps was a little further down the list?
Thinking so much about how much maths I've taught in primary schools, my recollection of maths at primary is very vacant, almost like it just happened and I didn't really take it all in. Obviously, when I was going through primary, a very sort of old school model of lessons, lots of going into books and doing lots of calculations and procedures. Not really any of that oracy or maths mastery. It was just, here's the method, learn the method. I'm more cognizant of it when I went to secondary school, because obviously then you get into streaming and sets, and it's all about what sets you're in. And I was quite able at maths, so I was always in that sort of top set and looking around there. And I don't know, number came quite easily to me at first. So I managed to get through some of my, the testing and the exams without too much issue. I got through my GCSEs, and then I thought, is maths something I really want to carry on with? And some of my friends went and did further maths, and they're brilliant mathematicians. And for me, I couldn't get my head around quadratics and simultaneous equations. I could see number and shape and those aspects, which maybe makes me better at the primary school level of teaching. But maths, I found it okay. Things like my times tables and stuff, where obviously lots of rote learning and just knowing number bonds from an early age, which I think came from practice at home as well. So yeah, I found maths daunting as it got towards that sort of older level, when it got a bit more complex. I think my attention span sort of drifted away then, and I like working with number and reasoning.
But when it came to teaching, you were fairly happy with what you had to teach in terms of the content, I'm guessing.
At first, when I started teaching 13 years ago, this was sort of before maths mastery and those big 5 ideas was really in my mind, or even a thing to think about. Maths then was okay. I was teaching upper key stage 2, going through it. As then Omar came into our school and came on board, we really started to think about maths in a very different way. We looked at maths mastery, master classes, and we really unpicked the sort of cognitive side of maths rather than just procedures. And that's when I I sort of became maths lead, and I worked with Omar in the school, and we looked at what what's the foundations for maths. So then, obviously, as you mentioned, I then moved down and I taught in year 2, and I went to nursery. Um, so I saw really the foundations of it, and like any teacher who's been up in year 6, they don't really pay attention to what's happening in early years. But when you move down to early years, you can really see where securing number, especially, the impact that can have. And so when my work in the trust now, we really focus on those foundations at the bottom end, and then even going into like the multiplication tables checks, the importance of getting that right. When that first came out, I think like most teachers, I probably thought, oh, another test. Is it
Mhm.
necessary? But then actually realizing, not for the sake of the testing, but the sake that the children need to know this.
Yeah.
But when they go into year 5, year 6, they can fly through long division, fractions, whatever it is. So I started to realize those building blocks, but it took me a long journey to get to that stage.
Yeah, some people might argue that the MTC is a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but I don't think anybody can argue that times tables aren't important. And yeah, I've written quite a lot on it recently, actually. And we had a great guest a few weeks ago, Kate Fern, who was talking about the importance of actually teaching conceptual understanding of times tables and things. And I'm fully on board with that. As you say, when we were at school, or when I was at school, and later when you were at school, Mike, you're a little bit younger than me, I think. There was a lot of learning by rote, and for me, they didn't stick in my head, and I had to find different ways of learning times tables. But I think whichever way you come to it's really important that you've got those facts. So, did you always want to be a teacher? Was that kind of your pathway through that you saw?
Um, no, not at all, really. Which is funny. My grandma was a head teacher, um, which is the only teacher that was in my family, really. And even then, I think she was head teacher back in the days when it was a very different sort of a way of life for schools. No, I went into business after university. I wanted to travel the world, be an entrepreneur, do my own things. I went into consultancy, so I did lots of work around business and project management. But then my sort of work in the business world became about employees and training employees and presenting ideas and upskilling people. So it was the human side of business, which sort of led itself into me sort of developing my skill set of being able to, share knowledge and build people up, which landed nicely into teaching. So I came into teaching a bit later, and then went from there. And it's been a bumpy journey at times, but sort of got to a place now where I've, really found my sort of area around Oracy, and maths is just one of those areas where I'm really passionate about as well. So it all goes hand in hand, which is
I
really
think when
nice.
a lot of teachers think about Oracy, I'll bow to your way of saying it. Um, I think a lot of teachers think about Oracy and think about English, probably first and foremost. But we're obviously looking at this from a maths point of view. Before we get into what that looks like in a lesson, why in a nutshell, Mike, is Oracy so important? Why is it being talked about so much at the moment? Why is it sort of one of the seemingly the foundations of the new curriculum according to the curriculum review, and the government's response to it? Why is this such a big thing at the moment?
Um, I think if you ask teachers that have been teaching for decades, they will say, "Oh, Oracy, we've been doing that. We've been doing talking and listening," and to some degree they might have, but not necessarily in the frame of Oracy. And obviously, it's come to the spotlight in education over recent years with Voice 21 doing some great work around their frameworks, and the EEF doing lots of research and saying that oral interventions. Um, a book I've been writing, I've been doing lots of research, and even if you go back to those real theorists like Vygotsky, Piaget, Brunner, and they say learning is a social construct. Learning requires language, and you don't develop learning and build upon it without being able to talk about it and debate it and discuss it. So that has been there for 60, 70 years plus. And I think it's coming really into the sort of the main forum of education in recent years for several reasons. Firstly, we have a better understanding, I think, of the cognitive science of it. So I know one person to look at is Neil Mercer, Professor Neil Mercer from Cambridge. He's done lots of work on the cognitive side of Oracy. So we have a better understanding of how the brain uses language to sort of make sense of learning and deepen what they know. I think there's post-pandemic, and if you work in primary schools, and even if you've had children that were born in pandemic or since then, that that sort of fallout from the pandemic of lots of speech and language needs being um, obviously not met through lockdowns and socialization, and children's language has not been as developed as it would have been beforehand. I think that alongside many things such as screen time and sort of the change in society have just sort of exaggerated that effect on children not having the language. But that's coincided, as you'll see when we go through the maths part. We're really looking across all subjects at how we use language, how learners are leading those dialogues and those conversations. Um, Especially in maths, you look at the 5 ideas and mathematical thinking, fluency, making connections. So that there was always that sort of recognition that in subjects like maths, we need to be speaking about it. And then Oracy has come around as okay, we need to be speaking generally in learning and wider than that even. So we need to pair them together.
I think when I look back at my own primary education, particularly, it sounds sort of similar to yours, Mike, really, in so much, and regular listeners will have heard me say this before, but without rehashing all of it, essentially, there wasn't a lot of teaching as such. There was a lot of independent work where we would go. I was not working on the same task as my partner, certainly in Key Stage 2, as I remember in the juniors. We would go and get a card from a tub of cards that would have my work on it today, whatever I was working at. I think it was supposed to be, a more individualized learning journey, I suppose. I can see the thought behind that. But it meant that I wasn't doing the same thing as my partner. So if there wasn't a lot of, there was probably quite a lot of talk, Mike, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of purposeful talk, and not a huge number of opportunities for talking around maths. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why I didn't see the interconnectedness of maths and didn't, everything was just a test of memory. Can I remember how to do this thing? And I didn't see that it was related in any way to any other part of the curriculum. So I think anything that we can do that can help children to see that and to understand it and to articulate it is really important. So when you suggested looking at a lesson plan, walking through a sort of lesson and what Oracy might look like at any point in that lesson, I thought that makes perfect sense. So are you happy to have a start at that? Is that all right at this point?
I'd love to get started on that and go through it in the order would be great.
Fantastic. Okay, so obviously maths lessons are going to look slightly different in different schools, depending on whether you're using a scheme or whatever that might be. And just a note on schemes, I suppose, whichever scheme, if you are using one, whichever scheme that you have will have some guidance in it, probably about vocabulary and also the way through the lesson. But we've been big proponents on the Primary Maths podcast of teachers taking some ownership over their planning and, not just delivering the lesson as it is in the scheme, but actually thinking about their children and the way through the lesson. So the way that Mike has suggested that we look at this is looking at what a warm-up and a starter might look like, what retrieval practice might be built into the lesson, and then teacher modelling of new learning, some pupil practice, an opportunity for assessment, and then what Mike calls an exit ticket at the end. So that's the lesson design that we're going to look at, but obviously it might need to be adapted for your lesson. I'll put these in the show notes as well. So if you want to look at how we're going through the lesson, see how that might be adapted to your school and your classroom, that's the best place probably to have a look. So it doesn't matter what we're teaching, Mike. It doesn't matter what year group I'm guessing, whether we're in year 1 or year 6, or what the topic is. But we're going to have some sort of warm-up and some sort of way of engaging the children in the lesson, say that this is a maths lesson, correct?
Yeah, very different ways. I know when I started, it was always a warm-up was built in and planned for. but sometimes people get too worried about preparing resources for it or doing things. And I think Oracy is a great opportunity. That's something that is just verbal, that requires very little planning, but a little bit of thinking. So it's light touch on that. And I sort of wrote, when I was writing notes for this, I was thinking about the old traditional sort of methods versus the sort of where we can go. And I think a lot of the time people use that warm up, or that time it's a transition, isn't it? Either from
Yeah.
lessons or usually from playtime. There's lots of energy, and their aim of the teacher is to settle children down so they're silent and they're passive and they're calm. So it might be something on the board or on a sheet, and it's the aim of it is just to get them sat still, which I get because I've taught children of all ages and I get that. But I think in terms of engaging them, what we want to do is we want to wake up their maths brain. So we want to get their brain going. We want to keep it low stakes. So it's not something we mark. It's not something we're worried about. There's not something that a child's going to be anxious about getting right or wrong. We're going to keep it and then really make it engaging. So there's a few that we use in the schools, and some sort of Kagan strategies that we've used for a long time. One I was thinking about was rally robin. So this is where we've got partners A and B, and it's very much like a tennis rally. It's back and forward, back and forward. And I do this a lot with a class just to get them going. And if I know where they're at, they might have been just practicing their 5 times tables.
Yeah.
So we'll get them to ping back and forward 5, 10, 15, and I'll model it and the children do it. It's fast paced. What you get then is not one child doing one thing at a time, it's every child is practicing. And so you can do that. You can do, let's count up in our prime numbers. I'm going to say a factor, you say a factor, and then we both have to say the product. Obviously that can vary based on age group, but for a very short sharp, it could take you a minute or two. You've got everyone engaged, and then after that, then you can bring them down.
Yeah,
So it's about
because
routines.
you're absolutely right. If I think back to my early days of teaching, kids are coming in and off the playground, they're still talking about who won the football match, or what they were watching on YouTube last night or whatever. And I wanted to get them in and sat down and focused, obviously, on the lesson. And to me, I think at the time, I definitely thought focus equaled silence. And I'm not sure that I still agree with that. So I like that idea of having something that you can take the buzz of the playground into the classroom and have some purposeful talk, I
Yeah.
guess. We used to do that. Oh, I'm not sure what you called it, Mike, with the counting backwards and forwards. We called it tennis tables. So we literally imagine that
Yeah,
we
so
were
you can call
serving.
it ping
Yeah,
pong or rally
yeah,
robin, anything
yeah.
bouncing back, yeah.
Yeah. So just an opportunity to practice their tables, I guess, or as you say, adapt it for wherever you are in the curriculum. Would you say at this point, though, we're not thinking about new learning. We're not even necessarily really thinking about retrieval practice for the lesson in particular. It's just a way of engaging that sort of
Yeah,
mathematical thinking a little bit.
I think so. You could build in some retrieval into it, but I think the idea is not to confuse them or to overload them and then to go, what's that? Is
Yeah.
something that like any good teacher, especially in primary, there's certain things that you're going to only visit once in the main lesson throughout the year, but you need to keep on revisiting for fluency purposes throughout the year. So things like time or fractions, where it's quite complex and they need to see it multiple times. So
Yeah.
always having them, and that's why tables is an obvious one. Although
I
obviously
think
we can use lots of
rounding.
tips for that.
Yeah, I think rounding for me, Mark, it was the thing that we did in the first few weeks of year 6, and then we never came back to it again throughout the year. And you knew
Yes,
that there would be something in the SATs test on rounding. And plus, it's just a really useful skill. So, rounding would probably be one. And I'm sure there's loads you could do with that. Just, again, put round to the nearest 1,000 on the board or whatever, and then tell your partner, give your partner a number and see if they can round it to the nearest 1,000 and see if you agree, that sort of thing.
definitely. And I just to say on that, and it's always good to model it with a confident child first with yourself. But then I sometimes as a way to round it up, I'll say, okay, all of you are B and I'm A. So I'm going
Yeah,
to say 1, and all of you together are gonna chorally say it back to me. So you've got them all saying it 5, 10, 15, and you might throw some misconceptions in there and they challenge it. And then you can round it off because they're all back on you, eyes on you, and then you go, okay, now let's move on. And this is not just maths; this goes beyond anything in the curriculum. You can do this sort of approach, and it costs you no planning or resourcing or printing. It's in your pocket. It's just something that is really useful to trigger those minds to be focused.
Or even if you've just got 5 minutes at the end of the day and you want to, just make use of time, you can play heads down, thumbs up some days, but other days, it's good to,
Yeah,
do a little bit of maths. Why not?
totally.
Lining up for dinner, that sort of thing. Get
Yeah,
everybody's
yeah, they
attention.
can bounce one back to you as they go out into the dinner hall. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, if you look at Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve, I think it's they lose half of it within the lesson if you don't
Yeah.
mention it again. So these little repeats all the time, children are going to see something so often, and little tiny reminders that their recall is going to be a lot stronger, which is what we want ultimately as they go through.
I mean, we'll talk later, if that's all right, Mike, about where people might go to find some more of these ideas specifically. Yeah, so starting off with some sort of warm-up or starter to engage in the lesson. And then you've just mentioned the forgetting curve. We know that retrieval is really important. I would probably at this point be thinking, it might be something that I want to retrieve that's specific to the lesson, the learning that we're going to do today, or it might be a combination of that, but also some other things like those topics that we know we need to keep coming back to. We need to keep taking them out of our memory, practicing them, putting them back. How can we activate that sort of prior knowledge that we're going to need, or that we just want to keep at the forefront of our minds? What might that look like, do you think?
So I think if I go back to my old versus new model, I was thinking of the old one. And I still see it. I say it's old, but it's still quite prevalent. Is hands up. Oh, what we were doing last time? Who can answer this? Hands up. You get the confident ones. Okay, let's move on. Nothing's really happened there, other than the ones that know it and already have it in their memory, have done it and shown you that. So there's different ways you can do the strategies for retrieval. I've written a few down that I quite like. Odd one out. So whether you say you're doing shapes and you put 4 shapes on the board, and it might be quite open. There might be not an obvious answer. Odd one out, but you're throwing it to them and you use different talk structures. Okay, we did this last week or last term. Talk to your partner next to you. Can you figure out what the odd one out is and why? And that and why is the important bit. Because what we don't want children coming back to us is saying, is the square. So
Yeah.
no, and you might have to give them a stem or a model. I want to hear it's the square because, and using some of that key vocabulary. You might have that on the word list or somewhere, but you're saying how many of these key vocab words can you use when explaining your answer?
Do you know, I love tasks like that because the kids always come up with something I hadn't thought of.
Yeah.
And there's because it's so open ended, they're not wrong. It's just not what I had in my head, and we need to be careful, don't we, that we're not limiting them. I think sometimes with, oh, I want the answer that's already in my head. If they can come up with something that you've not thought of, that's brilliant.
Yeah, and one thing that can do is give you really quick assessment for learning on any misconceptions. If
Yeah.
no one finds the odd one out that you're looking for that's directing into your lesson, okay, we need to go back and check this. So very quickly you can circulate a room, you can hear what they're chatting to their partners about. That's a nice way to get that talk and that retrieval. Another one that we do a lot of in our trust, a lot of arithmetic work throughout the year. The children might work on it independently or with partners, but in terms of the oracy, okay, explain to your partner why that's correct. How did you get to that answer? Can you talk them through the method? So you're retrieving that method, but they have to use the language of, well, I used that digit there and I took the placeholder or whatever it might be. So using things like those little arithmetic questions helps with retrieval, but don't just have them write the answer and tick it and move on. There might be an opportunity there for them to explain to their partners and then to explain to you, this is why that works in this situation.
And again, just to draw the comparison, we could do this in silence, couldn't we? We could put the questions on the board, they answer them in the books. The teacher goes through, hands up, who's got an answer for this one? Who's got an answer for that one? What are we missing by not having the conversation? What's missing, do you think, Mike?
So, I mean, I've seen it in books. I've seen it, the progression from books to mini whiteboards, which I think is really useful. But even whiteboards without talk, there's quite a few pitfalls. There's copying. It's quite easy to copy an answer from someone who you know has got the answer right because you know that they're maybe on it, or maybe they got it wrong and you copied it. But it's also, first of all, from books, it's static. It's not live. You can't get that assessment really quickly. Mini whiteboards, yes, they can hold them up and show them, but how deep is that learning? Have they guessed? Have they just sort of looked around? Do they really understand it? And even what I love to do, the children I know really excel in maths, I love to challenge those children in those moments. And I had it today I said I was with my greater depths, or the strong group of mathematicians in year 6. And I said to them, but can you explain this? Can you actually explain to me why that is the case or why that isn't? And they really struggled. And they even used the words, it's really hard to explain, but. And I said, well, let's try and unpick that together, because sometimes the children that fly through the maths, because their mind can do it mentally, they don't actually know the why of it. So our sort of mantra on it is, it's not just about the answer, it's about tell me why. And we'll talk later in terms of the guided practice. We often give them the answers. We say, here are all the maths answers jumbled up. They're all there.
Yeah.
Take their cognitive load off. You don't need the answer, but you need to explain to me why that's the answer, or why it's not the non-example.
I love that, because we talk again. We talk a lot about, the answer being possibly one of the least important parts, unless you're doing an exam. The answer is often one of the
Yeah.
least important parts of a maths problem, and thinking about the problem and how you've got to that answer is more important. So I definitely agree that sometimes giving them the answer, it's sometimes not even jumbled up. Just here's the answer, but how are you going to explain how you got there is really powerful. Just let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Forgive me. If somebody were to be watching a lesson and saying, well, okay, how do you know whether child at B knew the answer to that retrieval question or not, because they've just been given the answer by their partner? It doesn't tell me. You've said that write it on the whiteboard doesn't tell me what they know, but equally, I don't know whether they knew that answer or whether their partner just told them their answer.
I think there's elements to it, obviously, where children can hide or mask it, and I think that's hard to get away from. Obviously, using technology, our schools use a lot of different platforms that can give you even more effective formative assessment instantly on the board. So you can do jams and different things where it's, oh, there's the answers, let's discuss now. So the technology can help. And what I would say to people is there's a difference between formative and summative. And for me, the formative side of it is you circulating, and you can hear from different groups as a collective, yeah, we're getting it. You might know your individual children who you maybe know need a bit more support, but even for them, discussing the method and the explanation with a slightly more able peer can only be beneficial. Yes, they might not know it and they might show that they know it, but you as a teacher, because you have so many touch points throughout the day and the week, you can really know your child, because you might do mini assessments, low stakes quizzes. So that moment is about them retrieving it to their working memory, not proving that they know it all, because that moment will come at a different
totally
place.
agree. And I think kind of what you're driving at there is the purpose of it isn't necessarily for me to know exactly who in the classroom already knows this and who doesn't. Again, if you've got 30 kids who already knew it, some people will say, well, what was the purpose of that then? But the purpose obviously is we're doing retrieval practice. If Johnny had forgotten, how to do it, and his partner has just explained it to him, not just told him the answer, but explained it to him, then the purpose of that is clear, isn't it? Partner A is getting to do the explanation and think about it, and we've got that cognitive aspect to it there, and partner B is being reminded how to do it so that they're ready for the lesson. So that's always been sort of my pushback. But I think you're right. It's what you can't do that if you don't have the purposeful talk. If you're just giving an answer and there's no explanation and no thinking about how you've got there, then that argument falls down, I would say.
And I think we've gone through that cycle of live marking, coming away from marking books and going to live marking, but sometimes people see live marking as rushing around and marking. But for me, live marking and that sort of in the moment is about you standing back and looking at the bigger picture of the class and saying, where are the common misconceptions that I can address to everyone? You go in many classrooms these days, they don't have support staff.
No.
It's the teacher on their own. A lot of the time they're a younger, or sorry, not younger, but less experienced teacher. They don't have the freedom and the capacity to go around to every child and sort out their specific issues at that point. But they can hear, is there something that maybe 30% of the class there's a bit of a myth around it, or they don't quite get it, that we can unpick and it'll benefit more people. So it's knowing your class and having enough opportunities for talk that you can hear it and go, can we just stop and talk about this? Because I reckon there's more of you that need to secure your knowledge on this, rather than, my favorite one is when, parents teach this and I learned this, is that you just add a zero onto the end. Multiply by 100, add a zero.
Yeah.
And I say to, my more able year sixes, I say, I know you know it. That's the quick way to get there. But can you explain we're placing a placeholder and what that means? So things like that, where children, even the more able ones, because they've got the method down, they know the quick way to the answer. But I say, but hang on, we're not adding a zero because that doesn't do anything. So I always find little opportunities to stop everyone and say, let's just be really clear on what we're doing.
Yeah, being clear and being explicit about it as well. It's, some of these things are concepts that some children just implicitly understand or have seen that connection and they've internalized it, and that they've not even thought about how they would explain it. Whereas other children just don't see the connection at all. And so it needs to be made explicit for both sets of children, I would suggest. Okay, lovely. So we've done a warm-up. It's been nice and buzzy and engaging in the warm-up. We've explored some retrieval practice and had a good talk around what we already know, and how we can go about solving a problem, or taking that knowledge out, I guess, and just refreshing it. So then at some point we need to get to some new learning, Mike. What's a good way through that section of the lesson, do you think? It can't all be the children talking again, surely.
No, and I think when you've ever got new learning, you are the expert in the room. You need to there's some sort of modelling that you need to transfer. And I know in a lot of schools we're looking at the gradual release model, and that scaffolding being starting with, sort of watch me, and then, I do, you watch, through to you're going to help me, and then I'm going to help you, and then you're going to go off. And modelling is something, every teacher needs to work on as a craft, because I think it really is a craft. In terms of, we do lots of work in our schools on flip charts and how you present your representations and your vocab. But I think now Oracy is becoming a real focus on modelling. And I wrote down, I was thinking about my old sort of way. Sometimes people would just write the method up. I'm going to do this, do this, do this. Okay, you go and do it. Without any explanation. If you're thinking you've got children that might have different needs, or, EAL, and they don't speak English naturally, or they're not confident in maths. So where we've moved to, and this is something I really emphasize with all my teachers, is thinking aloud. So we did a lot of work in our schools on making thinking visible, those different strategies, and metacognition has come to the front in, the last 10 years. Making thinking visible, and thinking aloud your method. And I like this bit because children love to talk, and they know when I'm in the room, they get to lots of chances to talk. But at this point, I will say to them, you're not going to talk at all. Zero talking here. If I ask a question, you don't answer it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk you through what my mind is doing, my mental sort of processing out loud. If you hear me talking to myself, I'm not going crazy. If I'm asking a question, I don't want you to call it out, which is a challenge for some of our children. I want you to look at what I'm doing, and I'll talk through the method. And I do this in every subject, but I'm talking through it and I'm saying, I need to look here first. And I'm using the strategies that I want them to use. Let me check the flip chart. Step 1, I need to do that. But I forgot to do that. I need to remember to put in my place value holder, my placeholder. I go through, I might put in some deliberate mistakes. I've put that. Why is that not working? Hang on a minute. Let me refer back. Let me just double check hang on, shouldn't that product be larger than the factor? And I sort of talk through it, and I'm showing them some of the misconceptions, some of the things that I want them to do. And I'm orally articulating my thought process. And this works in all subjects, but maths is brilliant. You're thinking about, column method with exchanging or long division. There's so many steps to it, and you might do it in parts. But first of all, they just need to hear you. First of all, to realize that you can make mistakes, but you're not going to get too flustered. You're going to solve it. But secondly, just to hear your process so they can speak to themselves, and that inner dialogue, that inner monologue is really, really valuable.
I think there's, totally agree, Mark. I think as well, it gives an opportunity to we often say that the best mathematicians do the easiest maths, right? And one of my things over the years has been uh, how frustrated I would become with children jumping straight to a procedure without actually thinking about it first. And so one of the things that I always wanted to do was actually model the fact that I wasn't just going, which procedure do I need now? But if I'm comparing, let's make it simple, 3/4 and a half, and I want to know which is bigger, I don't need to, find a common denominator and do all that calculating and find equivalent fractions. I can just, think about, actually, I know that 3/4 is greater than a half. And, let's say it was 2/7 and uh, 8/15, for example. I know 8/15 is greater than a half, so therefore I know that 8/15 is greater than 2/7. And so modeling that sort of thinking out loud is really important, isn't it? Before you even go to, okay, now I do need a procedure to
Yeah.
solve this particular one.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
Oh,
No,
I was
sorry,
just
go on.
going to add that we went on that journey. We went very procedural for a while to really embed those procedures. But, I worked in a school with, I think, 50, 60% EAL, very, inner city, lots of deprivation. The children didn't have the language to really engage with the maths. And we said it's not enough just to teach them the methods, because when you go up into, secondary, into A level, and if you want to learn maths at university, it becomes more abstract, more conceptual, and it's about the concepts of maths. So we need them to start thinking mathematically beyond just, I can do a method. Because then
Yeah.
you see the children get thrown when another method comes or something changes. They go, oh, but I give questions to children, something like 199 plus 27. And they will say, I need to write it down and do column method. I said, no. You can compensate. You can think about it. Think about how you do it. Your parents will go around the shops and they'll do 99p and they'll work out how many pennies if they buy 10 lots and so on. Mentally, because they're thinking about it in a slightly different way. And you're right, we want that mastery, that fluency. Of course, when we go to the tests, we say to them, there's an always method. If you
Yeah.
need to use the always method in the test to take that pressure off, do that. But we're beyond that test. We want to make them, confident, fluent mathematicians generally. So yeah, it's important to have that ability to have open questions and the discussion about why in the modeling.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great place for that, as you say, and then going on. How about STEM sentences and any sort of choral repetition of those things at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a massive proponent. We did a lot on repeated reading in our schools over the last sort of 7-8 years. In terms of echo reading, choral, partner, and obviously you, like you said at the start, Oracy sometimes gets siloed into English, and repeated reading, people would say, oh well, that's an
Sounds
English
like
thing, right?
English. Yep.
And we say, no, this is a learning thing, and in maths is great because I mean, lots of the schemes give you the stems anyway that you can use, because coming up with your own ones can be quite tricky and knowing the vocab to use, but they're really important. And sometimes the chanting of those stems and using those stems as a frame is really important. So I'll give you an example. Usually when I'm in year 2, they're starting to look at exchanging. They're starting to look at adding those numbers in column method where they've got to take some either across into the tens or they've got to exchange back into the ones. Conceptually, that's quite tricky for children. So you have to go really, concrete and pictorial. But then I'm using gestures and I'm using stems for it. So the one I like to do, if they're adding up digits and they've got to take 10 across, then I might say, 10 ones exchanges into 110. And then I'll go back the other way, 110 exchanges into 10 ones. Another one I really like is looking at commutation in multiplication and addition. So I might say, when you swap the factors, the product stays the same. And we'll say that 5 times. And every lesson where that's coming up, I'll say, can we just say that again? And you go to year 6 and the children go, well, obviously I can swap these around because I know that the product's not going to change. Whereas
Yeah.
I go to other schools where that mathematical vocab is not being really reinforced early on. And I say, do you know about the commutative law? And they look at me like, I've never heard that. And we don't, sometimes teachers can be afraid because these words are big and they look scary and I never learned any of these words when I was at school. I didn't know what add-ins were or subtrends, but they're just words. And I think if we can get our teachers confident and we can get the stems in place for them, then they just need to really bang that drum, especially lower down the school all the time. Say it with me. You know, it reinforces it. It seems a bit robotic to an outsider. They might go, "Why are you just saying that? That doesn't help." But actually, research shows if you say it, your mind is going to pick up on it a lot more, and you just need to keep on repeating it so it becomes part of your schema.
Yeah, I used to. You might tell me I'm wrong here, Mark. I don't know, but we used to do stem sentences, and I get the children to whisper it back to me, and then I get them to
Mhm.
shout it back to me, and I get them to whisper it to the partner, and we would go over these things, as you say, probably 10 times straight after one another, just to try and internalize it a little bit, just like if you were learning lines for a play or anything else, really.
Mm,
And then, as you say, you need to do it and you need to see it, don't you? And you need to manipulate it. And those actions, as you say, are a really important part of that as well, because that helps to ground it in movement as well,
definitely.
which is, yeah, really important. Time is getting away from us, Mike. We could talk about this all day, but we're going at about the pace of an actual lesson now. So let's move on to the next part, which would be the pupil practice.
Yeah.
So surely, Mike, after all this talk and the teacher modelling and things, now the children are going to sit in silence and practice in their workbooks. Correct?
Uh, there's occasions when it's necessary.
Yeah.
I think the old model is silent, independent. If I need to know you've got it, because I need to know that I can mark your work with fidelity, knowing that's your work and not someone else's. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely times where you need children to sit silently so they can focus and do the method. I think especially when you're at an early stage of a new topic or a new procedure, there's different strategies you can use which are really useful to help children discuss those methods, and they show they know it not by doing 50 questions all the same tick tick tick, which is a workload nightmare for teachers.
Yeah.
Although some technology platforms can really help with that. But there's one such as one which I would call Rally Coach, but I know some people might call it something like the Silent Sage, which is where one child almost sits on their hands and the other child's the scribe with a pen, and they've got the question. Everyone gets the same question. The job is that the child that can't physically do something has to use their words to articulate to their partner what to do. And it doesn't mean it's the most able child telling the other child.
Hmm.
You swap, you take both roles, and the other child is then scribing it, and they have to know when they say put that digit in that column, they have to know what that means. So it really challenges them to be specific with their vocab, really accurate, and you have to model it, and it takes time. But then you can go in and say, okay, now you've done a few with each other. Now go and do a few questions on your own to consolidate and show you've got it. So yeah, you do need those opportunities to be quiet and focused, but you need opportunities to discuss what was this? Was this a mistake that we made, or is there something more to it? Otherwise, you'll never unpick the issues behind anything going wrong.
And the teacher's role at that point in the lesson, Mike, what do you think the teacher would be
Um,
doing there?
Obviously, a bit of modelling at the start. I think you need to give the children the independence to work with their partners, and there's a bit of work that needs to be done on partnering up people, and you may have to move people around based on personalities, and you don't necessarily want a really dominant verbal child with someone who's not. As an adult, you might have certain children that maybe need a bit of help and prompting, so you might sit with a parent, be like a third person in that conversation, um, or you might go and circulate and listen to what they're doing so you can pick up on misconceptions. Or even if you're confident that they're ready to go and take it, you get ready for your next bit of your lesson. You take a breather for a minute. You say to them, no, you're talking with each other. I'm going to prepare so I'm ready for the end of the lesson or whatever it is. So
I'm actually going to have a swig of my tea and just take stock for a moment and think about
yeah.
what might be a good thing to do next. Yeah, yeah.
So
Imagine that.
is, I always, yeah, especially for teachers that are newer to it, there's so much in the lesson to cram in. They say the children have got to be responsible for their learning. They can't be sitting there and you'll do it. You shouldn't be sweating more than they should. They should be working hard. Give it to them and say, no, for 2 minutes, you're discussing this question and answering it together. I'm
Yeah.
going to get ready for my next bit. And then it gives you a breathing space, and then you can see what they come back with. So you have to be smart with that timing.
I really love the rally coach approach. I came across it actually for the first time properly, I think, when I did my teaching for mastery training 8 years ago or more. And we were sort of took on the role of the children in a class, and Debbie Morgan, who was leading it, sort of took on the role of the teacher, and we got to do that. Teach the person or talk to the person next to us while they either used the manipulatives or they wrote it down or whatever it was. And I just think it's a great way of making you use that language that you've just been learning in the lesson. A friend of mine who was on the podcast a few weeks ago talks about vocabulary. Tom Isherwood, Tom Isherwood, who I work with, and is a yeah talked a lot about vocabulary and the issue with just having the words on the screen at the start of the lesson. Today we're going to use the words product, factor, multiplicand, if you like,
Mm.
multiples, multiplication, and then just going into the lesson and expecting children to just retain
And
those
it
and
disappears off the screen.
well, it disappears off the screen. He
Mm.
likens it. I don't know if he's stolen this from somewhere. It's perfectly possible, but he likens it to going to the zoo and having all of the information boards about the animals at the entrance to the zoo, and then you go into the zoo and none of the information is next to the animals as you see them.
Yeah.
And you think actually you need that. You need it at that point in time, don't you? You need to use it when you're learning it, and you need to have an opportunity to talk about it and put
Yeah.
it into practice. And I think Rally Coach is a brilliant way of doing that because it stops you worrying about what you're actually doing and disappearing into your own head and thinking about what's for tea or whatever. It makes you actually, focus on what you're saying to your
That's
partner
right.
and using that language. So
Mm.
yeah, it's definitely one of my um, top tips, I guess, for that sort of practice element of the lesson. And as you say, there's definitely also a place for some independent, quiet thinking time as well, because that's important. We know that's important too.
Mm.
But it needs to probably be built on the back of having done all of this practical and talking elements of the lesson too. Okay. Anything else you wanted to say about the pupil practice side of
No, I
things?
think like you said, people say, what about evidence in books? What about this? What about that? And I say, well, the real true test of if a child's got it is speaking to them. And, if you have people creating reviews or, if I dare say Ofsted come round, they will look, but they'll ask the children, how do you find it? Do you understand it? What are you doing? And for me, I do lots of reviews in our schools, and it's talking to the pupils that really gets me. Oh, they really did learn this. Because if they say to me, oh, we're doing this, and the teachers use the word product, I'll ask the child, what is a product?
Yeah.
If they go, I don't know, I'm just doing the work. But if they can say, well, it's when you have the factors and you multiply it. So that's where it comes through for me is the pupil voice. So we need to give them opportunities. We're not trying to catch children out. The testing would always be there at some point, but we can be confident from what they say and what they show us.
And those were always the best moments for me, talking to the children and
Yeah,
them actually being able to use the vocabulary you've just taught them, explain what they've done and why they've done it. And you just think, yeah, you've actually got that. Shows you so much more than a correct answer written on a page, I think.
definitely.
Um, so is that sort of where, so we talked about formative assessment. Is that what you're talking about at this point, Mike?
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, you've always had that when I was at school is books. You do the books. The teacher wouldn't mark in the lesson, of course not. They would take them home. They'd mark them. And even when I was teaching, I'm sure where you were, the early days, stacks of books going home to market. And we all know, and the research shows that doesn't have any effects. The children never look back at it. You spend your whole time marking, and we've come a long way. And we've been through, and even now, the people with the live marking and they're rushing around with a pink highlighter and a green highlighter, and the children are waiting for 10 minutes for the teacher to get, around that marathon of a classroom to do it. So I think that formative assessment, it needs to be more holistic. And there's different ways you can do it. You can do the agree, build, challenge. So in our schools, we do sort of agree, build, challenge, and build. And with the stems there. So I disagree with that person because, and so on. And you can listen. It's that real time listening. The teacher can go, okay, yeah, we've got it. I can see enough of you are understanding it and using the vocab. Maybe having a hinge question before you move on. That one key question that if they can answer it, majority of them, then I think we're ready to move on. If they can't, we've got to do some more consolidation. So formative assessment, Oracy is a really vital part of it. You try and do it without any talking, you've either got technology or you've got work marking books. And
Yeah.
technology can do some of it, but it won't give you the why of why they're thinking that. It'll just give you the output. So yeah, I think verbal assessment is really valuable for every teacher.
And then finally, this idea of an exit ticket. Mike, do you want to explain your thinking behind that?
Yeah, so I mean, it comes in many different forms, and it's been, I think, since the sort of looking at metacognition and making thinking visible, an exit ticket in any form is at the end of a lesson. Okay, what's your key takeaway? Have you grasped the concept? And there's many different ways you can do it. Old school might have been children doing thumbs up, thumbs down, drawing a smiley face in their book, or nothing at all, and just teachers marking it. And we've moved to a place with technology and ed tech where we can get, quick assessments and low stake quizzes, which are great. I've found a few strategies that I've used before, which I just wanted to share. One of them, which is called the forbidden word. And that's where you almost say to them, you need to explain this question on the board that we've been looking at today to your partner, but you can't use this word or these key words. So you can't use the word same or equal. You have to, and then that challenges children. They have to use words like identical, and so on, or equivalent. So you give them that challenge. It's sort of like a game show figure. I don't want to hear that word. You sort of ring a bell. That then shows children can actually talk about it in different ways, rather than saying that one's the same as that one. You can't use the word number, so they have to be using the word digits or places and so on.
Yeah.
Or just simply giving them a misconception at the end. Here's a question I've done. Something's wrong with it. I don't know why. Talk on the tables. Can you point out my mistake and why? Something like that, just to see, because, and I find this a lot, if you give children a question to answer, sometimes they just can't answer it because it's a blank page. You give them your wrong answer, especially as a teacher, they'll spot the mistake straight away.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a realization. Okay, you do know how to do it because you can find my mistake really quickly.
So regular listeners will know that I used to use my deputy head for that quite a lot. So Mr. Smith, I'll call him Mr. Smith. Yeah, Mr. Smith thinks this. Do you agree with him or disagree with him? And they
always good to throw someone into it.
Exactly, yeah. And to be fair, he knew, and he used to love it when he came into the class and they were doing a Mr. Smith question. Or they go and find him later and pull him up on it there and then, which is, another use of Oracy, I think. So everyone's a winner there.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. So hopefully what you've demonstrated there, Mike, is that Oracy can be used throughout lessons. It isn't a warm-up thing. It's not a tacked on to your lesson plan sort of thing. It's an intrinsic part of good teaching, I guess. And you're right. I think over the years, that there's definitely been elements of it, hasn't there, incorporated into learning, but perhaps it's something that we just need to make a bit more explicit now in this day and age when communication maybe isn't what it used to be. Those opportunities to talk and those opportunities to develop language and develop our thinking perhaps are truncated a little bit, sadly. So hopefully the listeners have found that really useful in terms of how, if you only take one or two things away from this conversation, hopefully there's been something that's just challenged how you think about each part of the lesson and how Oracy can contribute to a really successful maths lesson. So thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate that. If the listener, I'm sure they will, wants to find out any more, where might be a good place to go to, Mike?
So two places. So if you're on LinkedIn, then you can probably find me. I don't know if you could put the link up, but you'll find me on LinkedIn. And also from my work, I think you mentioned on the Oracy Shift, which is on LinkedIn. And also if you just Google it, you'll come across our website. And then feel free to drop me a message about any of the work that we're doing in maths or in Oracy. And I'll be more than happy to have a chat with people about it.
And speaking of LinkedIn, I saw that you'd had an exciting announcement this week. Do you want to share that with us?
Yeah, so it's been 15 months in the making. I've been writing a book, which is now at the printing stage, which is really exciting after writing a book on Oracy and social mobility. so wider than maths, but looking at the Oracy journey of children that come from sort of more disadvantaged backgrounds, language weak backgrounds versus their peers who, have all those opportunities, and looking at how Oracy as they go up through early years, primary, secondary, and into the workplace, and the different impacts it has on not only their academic engagement, but also their well-being, their life chances, their trajectories in life. So that's it's called Voices of Opportunity. Yeah, you'll see it on my LinkedIn, being published with Routledge in February. So I'm really excited about that because it's something, it's like an early Christmas present for me to get that note that it's come through.
Yeah, no, it sounds really exciting, and I will definitely be picking up a copy when it's out in February, Mike, because I think it's a fascinating subject, and as you say, something that is, as a result of the way that our culture's changing, I think is having an impact on children, every day. So, thank you very much for all of your input today. As I say, hopefully, I think it's been one of our more practical interviews, which is, I know, what we both wanted, and there'll be something for everybody to take away there. So thank you very much, Mike. For everybody listening, as ever, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget that you can also find us on Spotify and Apple, and vice versa. And if you'd like to give us a little subscribe on there, we'd appreciate it. Mike, I'm sure, would appreciate any feedback that was left in the comments on there as well, as would I. I will be back with Becky for another Aftermaths episode on Friday. But other than that, I hope you have a great week in school, and we will see you next week. Thanks a lot. Thanks again, Mike.
Thank you very much.